Welcome to Future Histories. My name is Jan Groos, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Cecilia Rikap in today's episode. She is Head of Research of the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose and Associate Professor at University College London and author of the upcoming book, The Rulers, Corporate Power in the Age of AI and the Cloud. This episode was recorded in the context of a recent Future Histories live event at the Rosa-Luxemburg Stiftung Berlin. Many thanks to Eva Vöpel, Nils Rochowitz, Aline Blankertz and Christoph Sorg, who were all in one way or another involved in making this event happen. Many thanks for that. And just a quick note on the audio, there has been a technical issue starting at some later point in the recording. I managed to address it through some post-production wizardry, and you will be able to enjoy the episode thanks to these technical wonders. But I nonetheless wanted to acknowledge that the audio sounds a bit different from a certain point onwards. Before we start, I wanted to thank Wilfried, Fabian, Lukas, Henry, Marie-Therese, Karl and Valentin for their kind donations. And now, please enjoy today's episode with Cecilia Rikap on corporate power in the age of AI and the cloud. Welcome, Cecilia.
Hi, Jan.
Cecilia, first of all, thank you for this wonderful book. It couldn't be more timely, I think, given that, as we just heard, right now a tech oligarch is basically the shadow president of the most powerful country in the world. Let's set the scene maybe by defining some of the core concepts you use in the book and start with intellectual monopoly capitalism. What is an intellectual monopoly and what are the key features of intellectual monopoly capitalism?
So let me start by saying thank you for this invite. I think it's a great opportunity to expand not only on these concepts, but also on our understanding about what's going on in the world and the interplays between corporate and political power. I would say that it's clear for everyone since the inauguration day, but actually this ruling coalition and the role of the U.S. government together with U.S. big tech companies ruling the world, and in particular of big tech companies, but also other leading corporations of being able to govern portions of our society is something that unfortunately is not new. And if we think about what intellectual monopoly capitalism is and what specifically the concept of intellectual monopolies wants to bring to the table is to emphasize that these leading corporations, and we can trace them back, for instance, to global value chain leaders, these leading corporations have the capacity to systematically turn intangibles into their own assets. Different forms of knowledge. Also, they mobilize narratives, they concentrate data, and they turn all this into their intangible assets, which are then used to capture value from other parts of society. If we think of the structure of a global value chain as an example of something that's more familiar to everyone, we can think of the leading corporation as a company that it knows who does what inside the value chain. So it's not only about the concentration of intellectual property rights, it's not only about the concentration, therefore, of patents or the design of a technology, but it's also about the concentration of the information of how the production process takes place beyond the organization. So an intellectual monopoly is in today's capitalism are leading corporations with a capacity to control beyond ownership. And they control not only production processes, the production process of different commodities, but also the production of knowledge. And this is something that is different from the type of intellectual monopolies that we could see in the first part or during most of the 20th century, where big companies or leading corporations like, let's say, General Electric or IBM, they were also intellectual monopolies. Think of AT&T and the case of Bell Labs. In those cases, what we could see was that the leading corporation was mostly producing all this knowledge that then it was turning into assets in-house. They had these huge R&D laboratories where they were turning knowledge, in part also captured from universities, but in a more linear way, and they were turning that into applied knowledge, into already experimental designs, and this process, this is something that has changed. So when we speak of intellectual monopoly capitalism today, we speak of organizations that can also outsource part of the production of knowledge. They outsource pieces of the production of knowledge. Can be described as a sort of puzzle. And part of these pieces will be done by organizations that are scattered around the world. But the leading corporation, the intellectual monopoly, will still have the capacity to put all these pieces together, to collect them, and extract afterwards value on the basis of recombining all these different modules of knowledge turned into assets. So what they do is co-produce knowledge with many other organizations, universities, startups, public research organizations, that then they appropriate and monetize. And this is the basis of their power, not only in the tech sector, but also if you think, for instance, of big pharma companies, they're not the ones developing the drugs. Most of the drugs and treatments are actually developed at university laboratories and sometimes at startup companies. But then, because they control key parts of this knowledge production process, in the case of big pharma companies, this would be what goes from bench to bed. It's not just conducting the clinical trials in their case, but they also know how to get a drug approved. This knowledge is also encapsulated, for instance, by big pharma. Big pharma also knows what are the physicians that will be prescribing the drugs and how to convince them about prescribing the drugs. So here also narratives enter into the game. And because they control this crucial part of the production process of every single drug, they can then capture the knowledge that was developed elsewhere in the innovation system and profit from that. And I've just mentioned the example of pharma to lead us to see that this is everywhere in capitalism, although we see it, of course, prominently in the case of tech.
Then there is a type of intellectual monopoly that holds a kind of special position of power in that it is able to control other intellectual monopolies. You call these special intellectual monopolies cloud hegemons, among them Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. What is special about those cloud hegemons?
So let me start by saying that the intellectual monopoly is a power relation, which means that someone needs to need the knowledge that was encapsulated in order to exercise this intellectual monopoly power. There needs to be someone that needs to either mobilize the knowledge or consume the products that are based on that knowledge in order to see these intellectual monopolies in action. And I was giving you before the case of big pharma. So big pharma, let's say that there is a big pharma that has encapsulated a treatment. Of course, that those needing the treatment will be subjected to this intellectual monopoly power. Of course, those participating in the value chain that produces that treatment will also be subordinated, but this will be limited to these users in a way. When we think of digital technologies are becoming not only, and in particular AI, is not only a general purpose technology, but what some of us describe as a new method of invention. For everything from brand building to drug development, there is this push to use data, to process data with AI as a means of invention, as a means of creating new intangibles. This means that the more we see an adoption of digital technologies, and in particular AI, the largest this network of users, of demanders of this technology. And the demand for this technology, if it becomes as wide as it is becoming right now, means that basically the whole society is needing these technologies. And who's producing these technologies, or more accurately, who's monopolizing digital technologies, and in particular AI? These are, we can say, big tech, if we want to use this use label. So we have large tech companies controlling the whole AI value chain. Among them, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, but also Meta actually control the network of AI research. So they are capable of imposing their research agenda even beyond the organizations, the universities, the startups that are directly linked to their funding and to collaborations with people from these companies. They are also controlling the open source space, and I can further unpack that later on. But there is one thing that only Amazon, Microsoft, and Google have, and this is the cloud. And the cloud for most of the people in the world is just a place where we store our pictures or where we store our files more generally. And we struggled with that because we run out of space and eventually we need to pay these companies for space. And we end up thinking, okay, the cloud is just a place where we get infrastructure as a service. Instead of purchasing a hard disk where we do our backup, we do backup on the cloud. But the cloud is much more than that. The cloud is a supermarket for digital technologies. Every digital technology can be purchased as a service on the cloud. And the cloud as a marketplace for digital technologies is concentrated. It's a very concentrated space. Amazon, Microsoft, and Google have over 65% of this market. And there, unlike other supermarkets, I go to a supermarket here around the corner and I will purchase, let's say, some water, and then I go and consume the water outside of the supermarket. The cloud is a supermarket where you not only buy the digital technologies, but you're also forced to consume them there. And in fact, the technologies were also produced in this supermarket. So I will give you a very simple example of a developer. A developer is designing, let's say, a new app. And for that, it will, of course, need processing power. It will need a place to store the solution, but it will also need to connect it to other services and will also use existing software to develop it. And all that can be done on the cloud. And more developers are pushed and startups are pushed and larger organizations are also pushed to do that on the cloud, which means at the same time that someone is coding to hire services on the cloud. And when that is done, these services are hired as black boxes. So there is no way to really access the technology. There is a use of the service without access to the lines of code if you want. What happens afterwards is that you end up with a solution that can only work on the cloud, and in particular can only work on the cloud of that company. Because although we have three, they do not interoperate. And afterwards, you want to sell that solution that was produced and that intrinsically needs from now towards ever services that are purchased on the cloud. And you want to offer it, and you're forced to offer it also on the cloud. And then someone else purchases that solution, and you're forced as an organization to share a percentage of those revenues with, of course, the cloud hegemon. And I call them hegemons for different reasons, not only because everyone is migrating to the cloud from small companies to states, but also because these technologies, the more used they become, everyone becomes a subject of these three companies in the end of the day. It's not, again, going back to the example of a treatment. In this case, the digital technologies end up being used by everyone. So the subjects of this power relation end up being all the organizations in our world. But there is an extra reason why hegemons are not just, rulers, and that's it, plain rulers. And this is because every organization, even states, are sold on the idea that operating on the cloud is better, is more efficient, is cheaper, is the way to get the best technologies. So everyone really believes their narrative and their way of showcasing their technology as the alternative, the best way forward. And everyone is also sold on the idea that AI is going to unlock the competitiveness bottlenecks some part of the world is stuck in, and so on and so forth. So this is why they are different, again, because they are capable of exercising this intellectual monopoly power relation on everyone ultimately.
And you describe the sphere of control, this sphere of power of these intellectual monopolies, and specifically the cloud hegemons, as networks of intersecting networks, and the way that they relate to each other as planning relations. Of course, this was quite interesting to me to hear. How do cloud hegemons plan the actions of other companies, even that of other intellectual monopolies?
When you think about how planning takes place, and inside an organization, you need an information system. You need data and you need information technology for that. And basically, by controlling these technologies, they can control how other organizations are planning, because they are the ones that decide what type of information technologies, digital technologies we get, how data is harvested, and even offer data sets in their market, in their cloud market as a service. So even if you want to train a model and you don't have data, you have a data marketplace where you can purchase data as a service. So by defining how these technologies work, they are capable of influencing how other planners plan. And I will give you one example of a concrete service. there is a service that is sold on Microsoft Azure Cloud for demand sensing. And it's not just a way to analyze past demand of your consumers and to try to predict what they will be demanding in the future. This service also integrates past demand with other data sets, macroeconomic data, even weather forecast data. So they put all this together and give predictions about demand. And these predictions are not only used for planning the direct market where a specific company is operating, but because the clients are companies like automobile industry leaders, they use this in order to plan their value chains. So they plan, these are planners that plan other planners. And this way of planning, because every corporation plans, but before we were used to see corporations planning just in-house. What we see now is a capacity, and we've already seen that with global value chains. There is a way to understand global value chains through a planning lens, which is that the leading corporation is a planner, but it's planning beyond ownership. It has the capacity to plan labor processes in companies that are formally, legally different entities. And actually, if we go to, for 1 second, allow me to refer to this legal angle. We speak a lot about multinational corporations. Multinational corporations as a legal entity do not exist. There are many legal entities, one connected to the other. So already we were seeing, if you want, the headquarters planning the subsidiaries that were indirectly linked ultimately to the headquarters. So what we see now is a further development of that. We see it already with the global value chains. We see it also with the franchising model, where the franchisees are copycats that follow the protocols, the rules, all the norms that were already put in place by the franchisor. And with platforms, we also see the same. The platforms are spaces that are planned by the company that owns the platform, that decides how things will unfold there. What will happen, what will not happen, what, if you think of social media, social networks, what can be posted or not, what will be presented first as in the ranking of replies or the thread that we receive on our phones. These companies are constantly making all these decisions and ultimately ruling these spaces that are no longer just the company, legally speaking, itself, but a spheres of control beyond ownership.
When reading about these examples, I was asking myself if a company like Palantir, is it following a different paradigm, would you say?
I would say that Palantir is similar to, in this regard, not in terms of the technology that it develops. Of course, there's a difference when you are developing technology for surveillance, for the military, for enabling the killing of others. So, of course, there is a difference. But it occupies a similar position than a company like Salesforce or SAP. So they are intellectual monopolies of themselves. They have a capacity to subordinate others on the basis of the intangibles that they capture. But still, Palantir needs a cloud hegemon to operate. Its services run on cloud hegemons.
When it comes to the sphere of control of these intellectual monopolies, you differentiate between a system of production and a system for innovation. Let's talk about innovation first, maybe. There's an empirical element to this, and then there's a prominent, often quite hyperbole narrative element to it as well. Let's use AI as an example. How does innovation actually happen in the field of AI? You speak of planning AI, and what's the narrative part that is spun around it?
So let's start more generally, going back to something that I was saying in relation to intellectual monopolies today compared to the IBM or Bell or AT&T and Bell Labs of the past. What we see today is an outsourcing of part of the production of knowledge. This co-production of knowledge by many that then ends up being appropriated and monetized by a few. So the corporate innovation system is a concept that basically tries to explain, on the one hand side, that, so co-production by many, appropriation by a few, and monetization of part of what was appropriated. And I say part because we can even think of universities patenting, and that also means appropriation, but still universities usually do not monetize the patents. But this is just part of the concept of corporate innovation system. The other part is the steering of the technology. It's not simply outsourcing and then everyone does whatever everyone wants. There is a process of defining what type of technology is developed, what are the questions that need to be answered, and what are the things, therefore, that will be left at the margin. And this is part of the planning of technology. For this book, I conducted over 100 interviews with AI scientists, AI engineers, also R&D managers, planning managers at multinational corporations. I interviewed people from 55 multinational corporations. And I was interviewing someone that was vice president of research of IBM in the past. So this person is already retired now. And when I asked this question about how innovation took place at IBM and the role of serendipity, he laughed. And I asked about the role of serendipity because we often hear that innovation is basically the outcome of just creative minds that somehow come up with ideas, and then we end up with the technologies that we have today. And this person, when I was asking about serendipity, said but serendipity is planned. And what did he mean by saying serendipity is planned? So he meant basically that you define the questions, you define your goals, where you want to go, the trajectory, the orientation of the technology, and then you invest accordingly. You hire the people, you put the resources there. And this is what these companies have done, not only IBM in the past, but these other companies. And they're not only investing in the technologies that they want, but they're also capable of influencing governments to also invest in the technologies that they want. These companies, like big tech in particular, have been very, very active in influencing the US government to invest in AI, saying that the real threat is China, that they shouldn't be regulating them, but actually they should be concerned about China and how China is going to outpace the US, and therefore they need to invest a lot in AI, in the cloud, and so on and so forth. And one would think, but hey, no, weren't they monopolies? Weren't they just thinking that they should be the only ones investing in this? Or no, precisely because intellectual monopolies, this way of controlling beyond ownership is much, if you want, is much more clever from a capitalist accumulation perspective. If you are just the only business in town, it's obvious that you will be regulated. It's also quite obvious that you will face more challenges. And actually, it's riskier. If you are the only one investing, it's riskier for your business. Whereas if you can outsource the risk to other companies, to universities that will be doing part of the research for you, to startups that will be also taking part of the risk for you, and you just then go and harvest the profits, is the best scenario. It's a win-win situation because you still get the benefits and you are not investing as much. So the way in which these corporate innovation systems work is basically as a structure to control and dominate, where the steering of the technologies to develop more technology for controlling workers, controlling society at large. And also, yes, every now and then there are also things that make our lives better. And this is important because the way to control people is not by punishing us. It's by giving us solutions to problems. It's by also feeding us or fulfilling desires so that everyone, every single consumer, every single user of their platforms, for instance, really wants to defend them also and becomes part of their sphere of control without even noticing it. And this is also how they control the narratives going towards that part. So the planning part is not just steering the technology and saying, okay, we want AI for surveilling workers. We want AI for military purposes, or we want AI to say that we are curing cancer. We are solving all the problems of the world, and we are selling that narrative at the same time. It's also a process of crafting narratives. For instance, I will tell one and everyone will identify what I mean here. Regulation stifles innovation. This is a crafted narrative for many reasons. If you take what I was saying before, I'm saying that the innovators are many in our society. In particular, in the tech sector, we all contribute with our data, and without data, there wouldn't be AI. So if we want to say who has produced the innovation, society, who has produced the code, the algorithms that these companies then use for their own businesses, universities, public research organizations, startups, in the thousands. So not only the companies. So the innovators, we are all the innovators. But then we have this idea that the innovators are just the company. So if we regulate a Google, we will no longer have all these cool apps and cool solutions, Google Maps, Google, the Gmail, and you name it. But actually, if we really delve deeper and identify that all this knowledge was produced by others and that we are living under a constant, process of accumulation at the expense of dispossessing the many of the knowledge that they co-produce, we take a different view on regulation. Because regulating those that are the appropriators is not stifling innovation.
And I mean, here you can also already see the certain function that this narrative of an entrepreneur who's the genius kind of inventing this technology, how it serves a certain function. Because if it's, I don't know, Steve Jobs who invented the iPhone, then if there's no Steve Jobs, then there's no iPhone. But that's probably not true.
Exactly. Absolutely. This idea, there's this very established myth of the entrepreneur that is associated with the idea of the innovator. So no, of course we need to cope with whatever because they are these creative minds. And without them, we couldn't be even sitting here. And actually that's a complete lie. It completely neglects the history of the production of knowledge. It completely neglects all the work that is being put into the production of knowledge. It even neglects the work of the people working for these companies. It's not like Jeff Bezos that sits down and codes for Amazon, clearly. But still people think, or it's not Elon Musk either, but still people think that these guys that are sitting at the top of the companies and becoming wealthier as we speak are the responsibles for the, if you want, for the quote, good parts of this technology. And believe me, I'm definitely not against digital technology, but I think that we need to be very conscious that one, we are all producing these technologies and we are all being robbed. Two, the technologies that we get are not necessarily the ones that we need, are not the most important ones. This is not the best possible use of the effort of a lot of people, of the resources that are put into this. And let me just, as a footnote, say that the consumption of energy and water that is needed to produce these technologies forces us to really reflect on the need for democratic planning. We cannot just continue saying, okay, yeah, like we just need to do the same, but publicly led or for people. No, actually, we really need to ask ourselves what technology we want, for what, for whom, and develop it, putting planetary boundaries and people needs and also people's desires up front.
When it comes to the system of production, you describe an immense increase in planning capabilities through digital technologies and gains in computing power. And with regard to these planning capabilities, it is, again, interesting that intellectual monopolies do not only plan within their own company, but they also plan their supply chains as if they were a vertically integrated company. So the ties to the suppliers, you argue, are not formed by market relations, but by planning relations, basically. Can you maybe give us a bit more of an idea of the depth and scope of corporate planning on the side of these intellectual monopolies, at least from the book? For example, IKEA comes into mind and examples like that from a very different sphere than just the tech monopolies.
And it's very interesting because companies like IKEA are using digital technologies to control, for instance, their franchisees. And not just the company itself, the IKEA store, but also the workers of the franchisee. So basically, every worker will have customized trainings, customized tasks that they need to follow. And all this will be tracked with digital, with software, with just digital solutions. So by doing it, they can exercise a sort of customized planning relationship. If you, and what I explain in the book is that something that has happened is the same as what we see in, let's say, Amazon.com, where I buy a pair of running shoes and then I will be receiving a lot of ads related to running or to doing exercise because it assumes that that's my profile and those are the things that I consume, and even more complex profiling. So it's addressed specifically to a customer that has been whose consumption patterns were identified by the algorithm, and something similar can happen sometimes and can even happen way more at the workplace. So a way to customize the control that is exercised in the workplace. and with the companies also that do customer services, that this is already being exercised. And companies like IKEA are already exploring it with the use of digital services provided by big tech companies in order to customize the way in which the workers of their franchisees are trained and are told what to do or where to put their attention. And this is not only happening in the franchising model. And of course, McDonald's also has a lot of this. And why they introduced the totems in the stores is also explained precisely by that, because there is this aim to have a sort of unique interface where the workers are part of the digital solution to some extent, and and their performance is assessed with algorithms. So an extension, if you want, of algorithmic management from Uber or Deliveroo or other gig economy apps to the whole economy, basically. But this is, if you want, part of what's going on, because also the other part where we see this as much more dangerous or as dangerous, but also quite concerning, is that the same is happening with states, because the states are also being pushed to migrate to the cloud. And when states migrate to the cloud, this means the whole public sector operation inside the cloud of a big tech company. So a big tech company deciding how things are going to be done in the public sector. So really, when we think about the impact of the monopolization of digital technologies, it goes way beyond these forms of control, beyond ownership in industry. It really goes to every dimension of our lives. We know it with social media, but just to emphasize that the public sector, think of schools, think of universities, of course, but also think of healthcare, and think of, unfortunately, the effects of the defense sector as well.
Okay, let's maybe talk a bit about the changing landscape right now, because I would be really interested in your thoughts about techno-nationalism. I think quite clearly there is a larger radical techno-nationalist project in the making right now. Doge marks the seizure of knowledge formerly exclusive to the state on an unprecedented scale. The funding of public research in the US right now could be read as an attempt to further strengthen the position of intellectual monopoly positions as well with regard to knowledge production. And people like, I don't know, the neo-reactionary Curtis Jarvin are at the height of their influence, and all the big tech CEOs are at Trump's inauguration, basically getting in line for the next defense contract. What do you make of this techno-nationalist push, and how does it relate to the forms of power that you describe?
Before that, I will say one thing about the effect of defunding or reducing the public funds that go to universities, which is basically not that they will stop doing research. They will do research more and more aligned to big tech and other intellectual monopolies, basically, because it will depend more on private funding. So this is a part of the effect. So we should try to go beyond what's the immediate policy reaction, because we tend to think, okay, they're not putting money, they will be under budget shortfalls and they will do less research. Maybe some, and in particular, some already marginalized research lines and disciplines will be even more marginalized. But the others will just be more and more entangled with big tech money and other large companies' money. But then going to the whole breadth and depth of your question, I think that if we'll see it from a longer and more global perspective, what was going on was an attempt, in particular in Europe, but also elsewhere, to regulate big tech. Insufficient, completely insufficient, without an alternative, and with all the shortfalls that we may want to highlight, but still, there were many attempts to regulate these companies. So to some extent, the big tech decision to stand at the forefront of this new Trump administration, to me, is a sort of defensive reaction to some extent to what could have been some form, or could have been a sort of limitation to their power, still not completely dismantling their intellectual monopolies, far from that. But before that even comes into the picture, I think that they realized that they needed to align more explicitly with the US government. And I emphasize the explicitly, because they were already entangled.
big tech companies, CEOs or top executives were already the ones writing the report, the MSCIA report that advised the previous administrations. It was already written during the first Trump administration. It provided advice on AI investment for the defense sector. So they are already super involved in pushing for investments and policies that favor them inside the U.S. government. Throughout the Biden administration, the number of contracts for military purposes that in particular Microsoft and Google got and also Amazon increased. Of course, for these companies, unlike how it was before, for these companies, a contract with the military is more a political than an economic gain. For them, the military sector is just another vertical. They operate everywhere. They have businesses everywhere. It's not really where they are making the money, but politically it's a win because what they are winning is more allies inside the government. And what we saw during Biden's administration was a divided government. Part of the administration, in particular the part that was related more to the defense sector, was totally supportive of big tech, whereas the part that was more aligned, if you want, to the U.S. Federal Trade Commission was trying to regulate them. And this led to clashes of power, internal clashes of power. So this was also a reason for big tech companies to strongly align with the Trump administration from the very beginning to have a sort of more homogeneous support. So this just it's not that this is just more of the same. Of course, the fact that they are openly aligning with Trump is super meaningful. The fact that Meta has decided that they are no longer going to do active moderation of the content also tells us a lot about their ruling power, their capacity to decide things not only matter for the digital arena, but broadly to our societies. But just to say that this outcome has a history, and this history for me is a sort of has two episodes. One is what was going on inside the US, and the other one is this attempt to regulate and create alternatives elsewhere.
Would you say, because I mean, it's one thing to have, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg getting in line and having his video out where he pledges alliance, that's one thing. But another question would be whether or not there is an alternative project that at least some of these elements in power are trying to push through. If there is a form of techno-libertarian, hyperbolic grab for power, let's say, connected to a different kind of vision of how to govern in general. Would you say that there is this kind of element as well?
This is a ruling coalition. I don't think that, let's say, the CEOs of all these companies were super techno-libertarians from the very beginning. I think that there is also an opportunistic turn here, a business turn. For their business, it's better to align with the far right today. This doesn't mean that they can align with a progressive project. It's not that. That's far from what I mean. I mean that their goal is clear. Their goal is to expand their sphere of control and keep on concentrating more value at the expense of all the others that are producing it and keep on concentrating more knowledge. And to do so, they're not simply just using, if you want, your economic strategies, but also a whole set of political strategies. So I don't think that there is, maybe I got this wrong, but honestly, I don't think that there is a sort of techno-libertarian group deciding everything that includes these companies. Of course, there are techno-libertarian groups that are part of this. Of course, we need to be super concerned about the rise of the far right. And the rise of the far right is also, to some extent, an effect of intellectual monopolies. Because intellectual monopolies, one of the clear corollaries is an increase in inequalities in all its forms. So we have a more polarized society, a concentration of wealth that we've never seen before, also in poor countries. And of course, the effect of that will be that people don't believe in the same solutions that the status quo parties keep on offering them. And we see the increase in the far right, but we should also see the increase in the left and how that has turned out in places like France. And this is not just to give you hope, because I know the context here, but just to say that I think that what we need is to really offer a bold alternative that takes into account that people realize that capitalism is not working, but they don't just want us to say we will regulate the companies, because they listen, we will regulate the companies, and they think, oh, on top of the fact that I don't make sufficient money to make ends meet, they are going to regulate the few free things that I have, because I'm things that I enjoy, because I enjoy social media, I pay very little and I get Netflix, and they're going to even take this away from me. So of course, the alternative needs to take all this into account. And I think that there is a space to create this alternative, and that we really need to focus on it, because if we just focus on the regulatory part of this, we're just giving more space to the far right to emphasize their project. And their project, if you think about it, is, and just one word about that, aligns very well with big tech at this point in time, because basically they can, and it's not, I'm not speaking here just about the use of social media, but I'm speaking here also of the narrative that those that put the efforts and the merits can make it entrepreneurs, and which ends up being a narrative of those that can pay for it will save themselves. It's a very individualistic narrative. The big tech narrative is extremely individualistic, and this is where it matches perfectly with the far right narrative.
And we will definitely get to the positive element in a minute. Just maybe in order to give you the framing for what I was trying to aim at before, I think what I was trying to articulate is a certain concern and not that there are like hidden groups that decide in the dark, whatever, not like that, but there are certain ideologies, let's say, techno-libertarian, anarcho-capitalist ideologies who are getting steam, and people like Curtis Yarvin, Mencius Morbach, who is very much influenced and influencing some people like Peter Thiel, who is of course connected to Elon Musk, to the paper mafia and stuff like that. So we have certain elements within these right now very powerful coalitions that are different from something like Google or Microsoft, and whom I'm afraid of in the sense of maybe being much more radical in an ideological sense. A person like Elon Musk, I'm afraid, might think of himself as the ideal technocratic CEO of the world, basically, like that's an
Definitely.
image. Yeah.
Yes, of course he does. But he is also an outcome of this way of producing science and technology, where we think, first of all, that science and technology is neutral, that those that are producing the latest technology are the ones that know more about everything. Remember the discussions about AI regulation when the AI Act was being discussed in Europe? People like Jan LeCun were invited to decide the policy. Jan LeCun is an AI scientist that actually has become an AI manager, because he doesn't code or think about the science anymore. For those that doesn't know Jan LeCun, he's one of Meta's chief AI scientists, also an NYU professor. And this explains also part of how the connections with universities are developed, because they have like these double affiliations with the companies as well. And he's French. And because he's French and he works in a leading corporation doing AI, he was invited to discuss the policy, how to regulate. So this is really crazy, because we end up living in a society where everyone thinks that someone, let's say that Elon Musk is the person that is the most knowledgeable about, I don't know, electric vehicles or satellites or whatever, which is not the case. Again, he's the person that is at most managing companies. So he's a good businessman, but that doesn't turn him into an expert in the specific technologies that are being developed. But let's say that he is, because he's portrayed as such. So for a lot of people, also completely trapped, I believe, in the idea of neutrality associated with technological development, which again is misleading just by the simple fact that technology is produced by people and it's impossible to be neutral. When we are thinking about the questions, when we are thinking about how to develop a new solution, we're always embedded, and it's impossible to detach ourselves from our history, from the context, for the things that concern us anyway, because there is this very strong crafted narrative of technological neutrality. This can be associated with the idea of a technocrat, someone that will go there and act to create the most efficient solution, as if economic efficiency could be taken as the best way to organize a state, to organize a society, and even assuming that one single person can do it. So yes, absolutely. There is all this crafted narrative that has helped create people like Elon Musk and others. Is extremely dangerous. But what my point was just to say, it's not just about the 5, 6, 7 very known techno-futurist, far-right, white males that are in charge of some of these companies. This goes way beyond to the underlying social relations, to the way capitalism works, and it will not be solved just by removing Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and the others.
Absolutely. No, I would totally agree with that. Of course, I think I'm just maybe a little bit afraid of a certain type of neo-reactionary techno-nationalism that is gaining steam, you know.
And also focusing on the nationalist part. I think we should also take this into account when we're thinking of the alternative, because there are also alternatives that showcase themselves as nationalists, even if they don't say it with those words. And we need to be very cautious, not because nationalism in itself is bad, or I understand it also and where it comes from. But I think that today more than ever, if we want to create these alternatives, we really need to work for technological internationalism. And this is what can work also from an ecological perspective, taking into account how expensive the development of this technology is, and also taking into account the effects that it has everywhere in the world. There is no need to have one AI foundation model per country, or whatever you want to name in terms of these technologies, one per country. There is really no need, but still we need to have solutions that are really made for and by people and that take planetary boundaries into account.
Yeah, let's get into the solutions. At the end of your book, you kind of sketch alternative pathways and you ask this infamous question, what is to be done? And I think we can all agree that times are bad. So Cecilia, what is to be done?
I must say that I often ask this question all the time. I put it everywhere. It's also in my first book. And I always start the answer with the same thing. And it's because I really think that, which is that it's impossible for one single person to say what's to be done. I think it would be extremely undemocratic as well. Nonetheless, when someone works on these topics, you're often asked this question. This is a typical question. If I don't include a slide on policy recommendations or ways to tilt the scale against these intellectual monopolies or whatsoever, I will get this question asked in many different ways, many. So, and also because it couldn't be more important to actually think of alternatives. What I will tell you is not my own suggestion, but actually one thing that was discussed among many. It was something like during, let's say, 3-4 months with different people from different parts of the world, we started discussing of what ended up being a white paper that is called Reclaiming Digital Sovereignty. The writing and the coherence, or, well, I don't know how coherent that is, but the attempt to make it coherent was done by myself, but also by 4 other colleagues. One is Paris Marx, then Paulo Gerbaudo, Emil Santana, and Cedric Duran. But it was really discussed and included the insights of, in total, like around 100 people plus organizations. And what we tried to do there was to really put together a comprehensive set of, one could call them policy recommendations. For us, it's a sort of like first insight for a plan for expanding digital sovereignty for people on the planet. It includes a lot of things, from discussions on civil and human rights to regulating these companies at the for the antitrust space. It also includes ideas on dismantling intellectual monopolies and many more. But what I would like to say here, which is for us perhaps the key proposal, is to envision the possibility of a public-led AI value chain, or more broadly, digital value chain or stack. And what we mean by that is not a value chain that doesn't include companies or private solutions. Certainly, it shouldn't include any big tech. But we were speaking before about planning and ruling, and what needs for us, what needs to be done definitely is to occupy the layers or the links in this value chain that are crucial for the ruling of the technology, for steering the development of the technology, and for opening it up for the many, and also for defining what, as I was saying before, steering the technology refers directly to what type of AI we want, what type of data we'll be harvesting, for what, for whom, who will get access to all this. And for this, we see that it's not just about investing in supercomputers or in having the material part of the infrastructure. It's also not enough with having public platforms, for instance, a public search engine, public marketplaces, regional public marketplaces for e-commerce. Of course, all this is needed and it's part of our proposal. But one of the things that we highlight and that I think is distinctive is that we need a truly public cloud marketplace. So the supermarket for digital services, we need a public solution, and we need it because without it, states can put a lot of money into training models, into offering all the infrastructure to startups and other companies for training models or training digital solutions, even if they're not AI models. But then all this in a capitalist society will need to be sold somewhere. And today the market is either Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud. So unless we find really, we develop a truly public cloud marketplace, there would be no true alternative to this big tech controlled AI stack. But of course, one of the things that we say there is that I would say two things, and then I give it back to you. One is that this public marketplace needs to have demand. It wouldn't work otherwise. And this is why we put a lot of pressure, I would say, on the states and the role for public procurement, or in terms of public procurement, the state can be the one purchasing digital services from this truly public cloud marketplace. And for what? Well, precisely to terminate all the contracts with big tech and to stop migrating to big tech clouds. So there are a lot of needs in terms of digital services for states at the different levels, municipal level, provincial level, national level, but also for specific sectors like healthcare, education. So for all this, or at least for one of these subsectors within the public sector, a truly public alternative could be envisioned. And this is the other point. It can even be done just for one subsector as a starting point. And this doesn't mean that this solution requires banning big tech from the country. I think that eventually it would be ideal, yes, of course. But for that to happen, we need to already have alternatives in place and show that these alternatives work. And this is why the role of the state, not only funding and not only consuming the technology, but also steering the development of the technology is crucial. And when I say the public sector, I'm not just saying those in power. First of all, this is why we also emphasize a lot the need for an international solution. This helps us democratize who makes the decisions, but also it's not just about states in plural. We really need to think or have more institutional imagination and create new institutions that include in the decision process, in the decision making, the civil society, social movements, unions, and also scholars. And the more interdisciplinary and the more comprehensive this can be, the better, but always taking into account that leading corporations have like an enormous capacity to capture also a lot of these other institutions.
And if you say that it doesn't have to be all at once, but we can have like a certain sector or a certain service that might serve as an example for how these alternatives can be of use for everyone. What would be the ideal one to start with? Also in terms of maybe power relations, because for certain things, it might be more difficult to gain interest also because it's too technical or not really in the forefront of people's minds. So what would be the sector to start with as a political project?
For me, definitely healthcare. It could also be education, but there are a few reasons why healthcare it's a better case. One is data. There are already a lot of data sets, electronic healthcare data and related data. The other one is that AI is already being showcased as the solution to all our healthcare problems. And I think that a different AI for healthcare is needed. So this is definitely an urgent sector. It has been a priority for big tech companies to enter the healthcare sector and transform the sector into another ecosystem that they can control. And this has led to what I describe as frenemy relationships with big pharma companies, of course, which are the ones that are in control of the sector ultimately. So I think that not only because of its political and social importance, how connected it is also to the ecological breakdown. I think that all this is also important, but also from the feasibility standpoint. We have data in the healthcare sector. There are also applications or potential applications of AI that we can think that could be good for people in general. And I will give you one example. And this is far from telemedicine or a gadget like as a smartwatch, for instance. On the contrary, we could think, for instance, of AI applied to identifying or connecting the spread of certain diseases with socioeconomic and environmental factors. Because if we think of data that is connected to socioeconomic variables and also to environmental problems, and this data is or can be collected, and we connect also that data with where people live and what are their healthcare conditions, it is possible to identify patterns like sometimes things that we already know, that if you are spreading agrotoxics in an area to as a quote unquote fertilizer for soybean or other crops, the people and also the animals that live in the area will have a higher incidence of cancer. So using AI to further validate this and to identify therefore what's the way forward is a use of AI that could be good for people and the planet. So I think that in healthcare we have a lot of also not easy in the sense of technologically easy, but easy to find cases where we could have this sort of public-led stack, where research can also be steered towards prevention, but prevention socially, not as an individual prevention, not because I have a smartwatch and therefore I don't go to the doctor because I see my vitals or other data of how I'm doing, but actually because we identify socially what are the causes of the spread of certain diseases or pathology.
And in terms of the larger socio-technical imaginary, what would be the framing of such a project? Like the bigger project, you already mentioned AI for the people and the planet, which is a nice slogan, I think. Would that be the framing for this socio-technical imaginary?
I think so. I like a lot the project of that magazine that was Science for the People. And I think that now if we reframe it for the digital world and also taking into account the ecological crisis, yes, why not?
Cecilia, there's a last question that I ask, which is always, if you think about the future, what makes you joyful?
What makes me joyful is to see that there is still a lot of activism and will to collaborate and think of alternatives. What I see it is that if you want, there are a lot of flowers blossoming, but they are not coordinated. And those planning are the companies. So I think that we have an opportunity there to coordinate more, to plan better all together, and to craft really a plan that can, at least build the scale against intellectual monopolies. I wouldn't be so optimistic. I'm generally quite pessimistic, but I do think that there are a lot of things that could be done, but we need more coordination, because we already have all the seeds being planted out there, but insufficient coordination.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Cecilia. Thank you so much for being here. And let's all work towards AI for the people and the planet. That was our show for today. Thanks a lot for listening. If you want to support Future Histories, you can do so on Patreon. For this, visit patreon.com/futurehistories, or you can simply tell a friend that you liked the show and that he, she, or they might like it as well. Thanks a lot, and hear you in 2 weeks.